Good afternoon and welcome to You and Your Business with me, Alec Drew, on 103.2 Dublin City FM. Each week we have an expert from the world of business sharing their knowledge, insights and tips to help you reduce costs, increase profits and drive efficiencies. If there's a topic that you would like covered, or if you feel that you can make a contribution, please email me at yourbusiness@dublincityfm.ie and perhaps we'll be here sitting one day soon chatting. My guest today is a graduate of Queen's University Belfast, former Finance Director of Smurfit Finance and Leasing, Director and Treasurer of I Love Turn Year 2030. I'm delighted to welcome the Managing Director of Kendlebell, Gerry Delaney, to the You and Your Business studio. Welcome, Gerry.
Good afternoon, Alex. Delighted to be here.
I've seen your CV and we'll go through a lot of that. The show would have been taken up just reading through that, so we won't do that. We'll do it later. We'll take it bit by bit. Let me take you back to school days. You're in school like most of us, but we're taking you to the Leaving Cert. What are you thinking?
Well, first of all, it was the A-level seeing I'm from
That's
Belfast
right, you're
originally. To be quite honest, Alec, I didn't know.
Right.
You know? Didn't know at all what I wanted to do. My family were very much in the legal business. My father was local solicitor, very well known. He was a local politician as well. Most of my family did law. I had one brother who did law and then switched to do accountancy. So I suppose, like the famous, I'm showing my age here, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, it seemed like a good idea at the time to do economics and accounting. It was something I'd never done before. And that's really, I didn't have a clear route as to where I was going.
So did it take you long to develop an interest in finance, for example?
No, I wouldn't say so. I suppose I was fortunate in that many of my friends also did the subject as well. So, you know, we had something in common. And over time, I then began to like the subject and began to take it on board. I wouldn't have been, prior to that, I wouldn't have been somebody who would have read a lot on business or followed business, but it gets into you.
That's right.
And you get very involved in it. And if I compare myself now, I can't let a day go past without reading, you know, the business news to see what's going on or watching business programs on television. That's the way I've become.
Well, it becomes a hobby when you really enjoy something. That's exactly what it does. It becomes a hobby. So, okay, you've got your degree. Where to next?
Well, the obvious route then, most of my friends were going into the accountancy practices. So at that time, you served articles for 3 or 4 years. So I got a job in Belfast, one of the would have been the second biggest firm in Belfast at the time, but would have been, by Dublin standards, would have been considered a small firm. And I actually followed in because my older brother had actually worked in there for a couple of years. So I joined that and did my accountancy qualification and studies. And it was a great firm to work for because literally you started. We had some very big audits, like Northern Ireland Electricity Service, which was a massive audit, you know, with 14, 15 staff. And I also was given the proverbial shoebox with receipts. I learnt about budgeting that day because I was given the shoebox with receipts and told, you've 7 hours to do the job. And after 5 hours, I was still sorting the receipts. And then I learnt that the manager who set the budget, she used to do a lot of work on these jobs at home and not charge the hours. So the budget, you were in trouble.
Flexi time would have been paid for.
Time, exactly.
That's it. Yeah. It's an interesting lesson. So you must have got a very good broad sweep of business and business acumen required, watching people there and how they were transacting.
Yeah, very much so, yeah. And I think that's a great thing. I mean, I would recommend accounting to young people starting off. I think it's a great profession to get into. Now, I know people think of accounting as numbers, and obviously it is, but if you look at where accountants are now in business, you know, Michael O'Leary is the CEO of Ryanair. There are accountants involved in banking, all areas of business, setting up businesses. They can be involved in marketing, treasury. So it's not purely the financial controller, finance director role that you end up in. There's so many other areas. And when I moved to Dublin, for instance, we set up a banking group in Chartered Accountants Ireland, and I think there was something like 80 or 90 accountants working in banking.
Sure.
2-3 years later, that was up to 1,000, you know. So accountants are in all walks of life, but they're not necessarily just doing a pure accounting type work.
Yeah, and it's very important that they keep up to date on exactly what's happening in the world of taxation and all of the things that matter to business. So there is a requirement around that to be up to date.
That's true, and I was hoping you wouldn't ask me about tax, because that is the difficult one to keep up with. I mean, tax is a very specialist area, and you tend to find now, because of the nature of tax, that people become tax specialists. But even within the other areas of accounting, people specialise, in say financial services or in retail or whatever walk of business, or in media, for instance. So they become experts in those areas.
I suppose from a perspective of business, it must be quite interesting as an accountant into a business. You get to see all areas of a company and how they interact and the cost or the profit levels that they deliver into the business, the value, I suppose.
Yeah, very much so. And you learn a lot about business ethos as well. I mean, one thing I learned at an early stage was the ethos in a company came from the top. The CEO set the ethos. If the CEO was a diligent, hard-working person, the staff followed that through. So you see all areas of business and how they interconnect, whether it be, on margins, profits, the interaction of stock, fixed assets, you name it. You learn all about that, and it gives you a great sort of grounding then if you want to start your own business. It's fantastic for that going forward.
Yes, and I suppose people having to justify budgets and then live up to budgets and deliver on expected outcomes from spending that sort of money. There is responsibilities on people which I think a lot of SMEs don't realise when they're setting up.
Well, and again, that's interesting, because when I started off in accounting, and I always say this to people, when I started off, anything to do with numbers was the role of the accountant. People said the accountant does the accounts and does the wages. We're not quite sure what else they do the rest of the month. Nowadays, line managers in organisations, the marketing manager, the IT manager, they have budgets, and they've got, even though they don't have maybe a finance background, they have to manage budgets and report on those budgets, and actions, decisions, planning is taken around that.
Yeah. So I suppose you're with this accountancy practice. You've spent a number of years there. Obviously, your head got turned to move out of that. Where to next?
Well, I moved to Dublin, joined Ernst & Young. And again, at that time, there were plenty. Funny enough, the economy wasn't great in Dublin at the time, in the Republic, but there were plenty of jobs for accountants, because most accountants in Ireland were, funny enough, going to exotic overseas places. I didn't want to. I wanted to stay in Ireland. So I joined a local firm here, but they were part of Arthur Young that became Ernst & Young. And because that was the obvious route to stay in audit, because that's the area I knew, but it wasn't where I wanted to be long term. So I was with Ernst & Young for about 2 years working there. And then an opportunity came to join the Smurfit Group. And it was daunting. I was looking at one of our, Ireland's biggest company at the time. Obviously, lots of well-known senior business people, and here's me, going in there saying, right, I want to work with this company. So I said I'll give it 2 years, and stayed 15.
Yes, that must have presented certain new challenges to you, coming out of maybe the safe environment of an accountancy practice to go into the world of commercial business and...
Very much. I mean, the accountancy practice is very sort of almost regimented in that you've got a job to work on a particular audit or a particular set of accounts, and until you finish that, you move on. When you move in as an accountant into work in a business, your agenda can change literally from minute to minute, hour to hour, depending on what's important for the business at that particular time, and also very much customer orientated. I mean, when you're working in audit practice, you don't really meet customers, real customers. As soon as I moved into Smurfit straight away, you were dealing with our major customers and interacting with them and having to help them make decisions or whatever. And the area of business we were in was in the lending business, so that was obviously, we had to know a lot about their business to be able to make those decisions.
Speaking of that, I mean, the banking world has changed quite considerably, particularly over the last decade or so. Going back to those days, how do you compare them to where we are today in terms of lending and prudence and how money was managed?
I think it's gone through a cycle. Certainly when I started in that area, bankers would have been conservative. They would have been very careful from a lending policy point of view. I think what happened then, unfortunately, during the early 2000s, that basically banking lost the run of itself. Not just banking, it happened in other sectors, and started, well, we saw what happened in Ireland, but it happened worldwide. Started lending based on property value and not cash flow, because at the end of the day, property value is great, but you need to be able to pay back the loan and you need to be able to pay back the interest. I think where banking is now is a lot of the senior people that I would have known and dealt with are not in banking anymore. They've left for whatever reason. So from what I see is there's a lot of inexperienced people in there, and And I think also there's a fear of taking decisions now, because you're always looking over your shoulder. There's always somebody in banking who'll tell you that wasn't a very good decision, you took that loan. There's always somebody who knows better than you, and it's always with hindsight, you know.
Yeah, it is the case. And banking in particular, I did spend some time myself in it, has changed quite considerably. But quite obviously, when we came into the 2000s, the accountants, who generally are prudent people, were sort of put back into the background, weren't allowed to talk and say the common sense piece of business then.
Yeah, you see, I think also there was change in the whole business environment. You know, it very much went to, you know, growing shareholder wealth, and the pressure was on people in organisations, in large companies, to produce profits for shareholders. And of course the question is, you could always point to somebody else who had a better return, so if they're doing it, why can't you do it? And I think that sort of started to take over from prudence. I mean, I see it even in terms of accountants now, you know, the diligence that and not just myself, but people of my age group when we started would have had. We wouldn't, you know, in terms of reconciling numbers, making sure everything was right, and dotted all the I's, crossed the T's. You don't see that as much with the people coming through now. There's a bit more of a sort of, you know, laissez-faire attitude. You took the words out of my mouth, laissez-faire, like, you know, it'll be all right tomorrow or all right in the night.
Yeah, you know? That's disappointing to hear. By the way, if you're just joining us now, you're listening to me, Alec Drew, on 103.2 Dublin City FM, where my studio guest is Gerry Delaney, Managing Director of Kendlebell, where did I get that from? Kendlebell, sharing his knowledge on business. We were just speaking about banking and stepping out of that. So obviously you had, what did you say, 15 years in?
15 years in Smurfit's, yeah.
Okay, we move on. Where to next?
For various reasons, part personal and for business, I took a decision. I have to be quite honest, I didn't see Smurfit's as a place I wanted to retire from.
All right.
I won't say I got it purely on the golf course one day, but I was playing in Smurfit's had a very good golfing society, and I was playing with 4 pensioners from Smurfit's who had worked from the age of 16 to the age of 65, and they griped for 18 holes. And I said to myself, I don't really want to leave Smurfit's with that sort of memory. I want to leave when I'm happy to leave. So I did. I chose my time, and I was delighted to leave when I did. And I basically took a break for a year or so, and travelled and cleared out the head, relaxed, came up with lots of business ideas, some of which don't look very good with hindsight, but at the time they look great. So, and then came back to Dublin right in the middle of the 1999 and I couldn't believe, I was only away 18 months, and I couldn't believe the changes that were in Dublin in that short period. The place was flying. I was out with a couple of friends one night, and at 10 o'clock they all got up to go, and I said, where are you going? And they said, well, we have to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning to get to work. And you know, it was just, things had changed, and I actually nearly got on a plane again. I said, this is not for me, you know. Yeah,
that wasn't the Dublin you that we all knew so well.
Yeah. Well, we saw what happened to that, unfortunately.
Yeah, we did, later. But no, it was good. So you set up your own business?
Yeah, I came back and I set up doing training consultancy business, Delaney Financial Consultancy, and to a certain extent it was, I met 1 or 2 former colleagues from Smurfit's who had also, the company I was with actually was sold to Bank of Scotland, and so there were a few people who were knocking around looking for things to do, so we got together, we came up with a few ideas. I came across an investor in a company that we had actually funded in Smurfit's, and she was looking for somebody to get involved, provide training to start-up companies. It's the forerunner of what is now called New Frontiers in Enterprise Ireland.
All right.
So I came on board doing the financial projections, helping people with financial projections for their budgets and business plans, and also in terms of strategy, and basically mentoring them in terms of their businesses from scratch. I also got involved with Irish Times Training, providing, and I still work with them, and took on some non-executive directorships, basically providing financial director role to companies that didn't need a full-time finance director, but you know, had a good bookkeeper, but wanted somebody who could look at the strategy.
So what were the sort of key learning pieces that you took from working with Smurfs that you were able to bring into your own particular business?
Well, I'll tell you one thing that it certainly did for me was confidence, you know, personal confidence. I wouldn't be sitting here today if I hadn't worked in the Smurfit Group. I don't think I could have set up my own business. It gave me the confidence to go and do things, so that was very important. Another thing that came out very much was that I very much in terms of how I deliver services to business people, is that being as good as or as bad as the competition is not good enough. That was unacceptable in Smurfit's. You never went to a review meeting and said, well, we had a bad month, but so did everyone else. You were shown the door fairly quickly. So, no excuses. Always try to do better in terms of what you deliver. So very, very important that was,
Yeah, I think people tend to forget that, particularly smaller companies when they're setting up, that there is a quality expected by people, particularly if you want to do business with large companies. They have an expectation.
Very much so. And funny enough, a lot of bad came out of the crash, obviously, but some good came out of it. People went back to saying, we need to provide quality service. And I certainly found in Kendlebell, people asked me, well, where are you based? And are you a local provider, or are you based overseas, a call centre based overseas, and what type of service do you provide? So, people started going back to the sort of core values in that sense. I think that was important.
So I suppose a recession is always a good shake-up for business. Not that we want them that often.
No, hopefully not. Hopefully we won't see that again. But I remember again before the crash, and I was just starting up in Kendlebell, when I was out networking, meeting people, everyone was saying, yes, we want to use your service. And when you followed up the following day, they said, no, not interested, or they wouldn't return calls. I think now if people are interested in using your service, or they're genuine, so you know where you stand, and I think that works. That's good for everybody.
That's something I'm always keen to encourage people to do in business. Sometimes you have an interest in a particular service or product, and you go ahead and get a quotation or something in, but for some reason you may lose interest, but you leave the guy hanging. Yeah, and I think that's very disappointing. It seems to be an Irish trait. I don't think it's so prevalent.
I don't know if it's just an Irish. Interesting, because I wrote an email to somebody this morning thanking him for at least coming back and saying he'd gone another route. And I said thank you for that. I wrote a similar email yesterday. Fortunately, I wrote a number saying I'm glad you're going to do business with us. So yes. we won some and lost some, but I don't know if it's an Irish trait. I don't know whether it happens elsewhere. I think, unfortunately, email is fantastic, but there's an element of people use it sometimes to hide behind, or just don't reply. I always reply to emails, even if it's a negative reply that I'm giving somebody. I just won't let it go, because I think it's common courtesy as well.
I think so too. Just tell people where they stand and not be wasting their time. You've mentioned on a couple of occasions there Kendlebell. Tell me about that as a business model and how you got involved with it.
Yeah, well, basically, around about 2004, I was looking at my own consultancy business, and one of the issues about consultancy is, yourself, Alec, you can only be in the one place at the one time. People really don't want to see you in July and August and December, so it's a short window of opportunity. I also looked at my income, and this is part of using my financial skills. Most of my income ultimately was coming from the public purse, whatever circuitous route it got to me. So I wanted a business where I could would provide recurring income, and a business that I could bring value to. I looked at various businesses that I could buy, and at that time, 2004, 2005, far too expensive. And a lot of them, I wasn't really going to bring anything to the business. There was a manager or somebody in the business, and if they left, then I would have spent a lot of money and left with something I couldn't run. So it came across, funny, I'd looked at software that provided virtual office call center software that would, so you would be setting the business up from scratch, but came across the Kendlebell franchise around about the end of 2006 and met the master franchisor. It happened to suit. I could see how it would fit in with the skills that I had. And it also suited as well in terms of my wife. Not that we were planning to go into business together. We actually hadn't planned that. But she was looking to change job as well. And I said, look, it'll suit your skills. It'll suit my skills. And let's look at this,
If you're just listening to us now, you're listening to me, Alec Drew, on 103.2 Dublin City FM, where my studio guest is Gerry Delaney, Managing Director of Kendlebell, sharing his knowledge on business. We were just talking about franchises. That's quite an interesting one, because a lot of our listeners would be quite fascinated by the model around franchises. You've got involved in Kendlebell, and we talk about that in a minute. Did you look at any other potential franchises that were out there, and what were the good and bad pieces of them?
Yeah, I looked at, I would have attended the various franchise fairs that would have been held in Dublin, and I also went over to the UK to attend some franchise fairs. I also spent quite a bit of time on the internet looking at the likes of Canada, Australia, United States, because they tend to be ahead of us in terms of what's coming down the tracks. And it wasn't so much the franchise model, it was just the business just didn't. I couldn't see what I could bring to the business, you know, in terms of my knowledge, expertise. You know, a big selling point for me in Kendlebell is that I suppose, and again, it comes back. The business I was involved in, Smurfit's, 90%, 95% of our business came over the telephone. So
yes,
and that's what we do. And so I understood how important it was to provide good telephone service to people, whether it's selling a service or providing a service to somebody. So I think it's important to get involved in something that you can bring value to. I mean, if you're just going to go in and you're just going to be the person who does the books, or, you know, that's not adding value to the business. So whereas I could see that the service we provide, and this is where, you know, I think we score in our business, is that, and I would always try to meet as many of my potential clients as possible, because I'll see, because of my business experience, I'll see things in their business, and I'll see areas where I can help them, and things that maybe they didn't anticipate, and then you start to build a relationship with that person, and that's what I saw I was able to do with the franchise.
Yeah. You've also mentioned that you went into business with your wife in a franchise. That must have been an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, we didn't plan to, as I said, and obviously a bit nervous about that, but I had a few rules, unwritten rules, I suppose, and again, I learnt this. I was working on one of the first audits I went on in when I moved to Dublin. I won't mention the name as such, but I arrived out at the company and was put into a room, and outside the room there were two accountants sitting beside each other, and they were husband and wife, and I said, oh my goodness, what did they talk about on the way home? You know, did you have a good day at the office today? You know, and of course, you know, within an organisation there could be friction, and I said that could be difficult. So we have clear dividing lines. We have separate offices. My wife looks after the operations, and she deals with the staff in terms of issues or anything that arises, or getting new clients up and running. I deal with the business development, so, you know, I'll talk to the new prospects, I'll go out to them, do whatever has to be done to get them signed up. But then I pass it over to her, and she then deals with them in terms of the actual operations. We don't discuss business at home unless we really have to. And then we'll say, okay, we need half an hour tonight, or we need 15 minutes to discuss a particular issue. So when we walk out of the office this evening, you know, we're going out tonight, and we won't talk business, you know.
That's an interesting dynamic to put in the relationship, because it's very, very important that there are clear lines, both in terms of the operation and the parts both of you play in it, but also then there's very easily an opportunity for it to spill over into your personal lives and start consuming that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a danger that, you know, if we were cutting across each other, there would be conflict, and that conflict might show in the office. And we're a small business, so, you know, that, because I'm also very conscious of the staff then, because they're conscious they're working for a husband and wife team, and the last thing you really want is them to say, oh, they're having a fight today, or they're having another fight. Fortunately, we're 12 years in the business, we've never had a fight in public. We might have had a few disagreements over certain aspects outside the office, which is natural. But that's very important, because if the staff get a bad feel, it's going to, and particularly in our business, you know, it's about the people on the phone and how they sound on the phone, and if they're not happy, that's going to come across on the phone. Yeah,
it translates. Being in the business, and particularly around phones over 12 years, there's obviously been a huge shift in technology. How has that worked for you?
Well, without technology, our business wouldn't exist. Simple as that, you know. And it's we are now able to provide services we couldn't provide, you know, 10, 12 years ago. And particularly a lot of it related to our clients. You know, they had old phone systems that couldn't transfer calls through to us or whatever. So we have a lot of flexibility in terms of the service. We can, I mean, when I talk to a prospect, I say, look, you tell me what you want and we can do it. You know, so we couldn't do that with the technology. The other side is we have everything backed up in terms of, you know, if our broadband goes down, we automatically flick over to another provider. So that's something that it's just critical in our business, you know.
And it's a different way of purchasing a particular service that every business needs.
Oh yeah, and you know, I think I very much look at the clients in terms of, you know, what can we do for them, where can we add value for them, and a lot of our customers tend to be professional firms, and the brand name is very, very important for them. So as I tell our employees when I'm recruiting them, when you're on the phone for a particular client, you're actually working for that client for that minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever time. and that's very important.
And it gives them a certain amount of flexibility as well. If there's a surge in volume or things that need to be dealt with, rather than have to drag staff out of their own business from other functions, they have the flexibility.
Or they have to go and find somebody part-time, and then they've got to train them up, and then the person doesn't work out and they've got to start again. They know, even if they only use us part-time, they know that when they come back to us in 3 months' time, we're there, we have the staff trained up, we can literally switch in at short notice. Or quite often, Friday afternoons, the CEO wants to work at home, and CEO can work or somebody else can work at home, and we can take their calls for them. So it makes it much more flexible for them and helps them to manage their resources in their business.
In terms of people wanting to find out more about that, where's the website, or where would they get more details?
They can go to kbelloncall.ie.
kbelloncall.ie. Well, that's great. I think people might be quite interested in that, because it gives a certain flexibility around business. I just wanted to move more into the social life, but it has a business connection. I see you've been sort of very involved in committees all of your life. What drove you to getting involved in that?
That's interesting. That goes right back to when I started in accountancy. I was sitting in the office my first year in accountancy in work, and one of the guys came in and said, "Gerry, would you like to get involved in the Ulster Society of Chartered Accountants, the Ulster, the trainees, students?" And I thought to myself, committees? And then I said, well, hold on, this is my career, change of life, let's get involved. And it started there, and it hasn't finished. I'm trying to get off them now.
It's interesting, as you said, with finance, it had a similar influence on your life, that finance mightn't have been the place you went to initially, but suddenly you got an interest in it, and now committees also have a similar way of drawing you into them.
Well, I think it's important in terms of work-life balance. That's you've got to have something outside of business, and that's something very important to me. That yes, I'm 100% committed business-wise, but I'm also 100% committed outside of business, and it gives you the break from business and helps to manage stress.
Listen, that's fantastic. There we go, an all-rounder. That's all we've got time for today. A special thanks to our guest, Gerry Delaney, Managing Director of Kendlebell, for coming into the You and Your Business studio. Thanks also to Garrett on sound. Don't forget that you can contact the show by emailing Your Business Dublin City FM with your comments and suggestions. The podcast Today Show will be available on dublincityfm.ie from tomorrow. Thank you, and we'll see you again next week.